Alright guys, I finally figured out how to build your website the way you actually envision it, and it's called Wix. Now, being Theojo the tech YouTuber,
This is the Dolphin Technology DTR1. And yes, that's Dolphin, not Dolphin. And before you say, oh, that's not the French pronunciation, well, it's not a French company, it's an American one. For instance, we have Dauphin Island, Dauphin County, and Dolphin Technology. I didn't make it up, that's just how it is here. Anyway, let's get back to the DTR1, which was manufactured through a partnership with IBM in May of 1993, starting at a price of $2,495. Dolphin was founded in 1988 by Mr. Alan Yong in the village of Lombard, Illinois. He'd moved on from his Chinese restaurant business to start a computing company with a focus on mobile hardware, and before the DTR1, they were known for making monstrous $10,000 laptops that sold largely to the US Department of Defense. After experimenting with various pin-based computers like the Dolphin 5000 and striking a deal with IBM to make use of their underutilized Austin, Texas manufacturing facility, they decided to build a more all-encompassing yet compact computer system which became the DTR1. And DTR stands for desktop replacement, by the way. The idea was that this was the only computer you would need. You don't need to take a sub-notebook or a laptop with you, and you can leave the desktop at home. This is your computer now. And it was pretty impressive. It was not only the most compact 486-based machine at launch, weighing 2.5 pounds or just over a kilogram, but it released several months before Apple's Newton, making the DTR1 one of the first fully featured tablet PCs on the market. And by that I mean it could run complete desktop PC software suites written for MS-DOS 6.0 and Windows 3.1, of which it came with both. But despite its feature set, the DTR1 only sold around 4,000 units. And it's no big wonder because this thing kinda sucks. But before we get to the suck, here's what you get in this illustrious looking package. First up is the first carton, which provides an external power supply, and this was really the first problem with the computer. It had a high rate of failure, it gets very hot, and it was infamously prone to melting. There's chocolate bars that hold up better than this. Then you also get the DTR1 itself, which is quite a sleek industrial design for the time. With a 6-inch black and white backlit LCD at 640 by 480 resolution, controls above the screen for brightness, contrast, sleeping, and a turbo mode, serial Ethernet, and a 2400 BPS dial-up modem, a PS2 keyboard connector, VGA video output, a parallel printer port, a power connector, a hybrid floppy/IDE hard drive port, a power switch, and a spot for holding the battery, which provided up to 2 hours of battery life in the best case scenario. And usually it had a sliding cover on the top of the unit, but that one is missing from mine. On to carton number 2, which provides a Dolphin-branded smooth grain leather portfolio case. A keyboard cable extension, because the one on the keyboard itself is annoyingly short, the electronic stylus, and yes, it takes a trio of Type 393 button cell batteries to work, and it comes with some extra stylus tips. And finally, the 84-key PS2 compatible keyboard, which is pretty small and really cheap feeling. It's a 75% sized keyboard, about the size of a ZX Spectrum actually. It's almost worse than that though, somehow. It's not good. And of course, what's behind carton number 3? Well, an assortment of software, such as Windows Pin extensions and the Pin Cell spreadsheet from Dolphin. It also originally had some Windows and MS-DOS disks, but those were long gone when I got this one. Also has a 128-page instruction manual providing a thorough walkthrough of each feature. Seriously, it's pretty in-depth. And then there's the best part of this package, an extensive history of this particular machine. I love when computers come with this kind of provenance and the history and all of that. All this paperwork is great. The original owner saved the ads that he looked at, which led him to the system in the first place. Turns out he bought it from one of those ads from TredX in October of 1994 for $743.52. Yeah, that's a hefty discount, which was a result of IBM's attempt to unload their warehouses of excess inventory at a heavy loss just a year after it launched. And the rest of the paperwork, I can't show you everything because there's a lot of private information in here, but a fantastic story is told through a series of faxes, receipts, and letters. Pretty much everything failed with this Dolphin DTR1 here. The power supply, the keyboard, the stylus, the battery, even the operating system itself, it all just died and he had to send it back. Oh, poor guy, like 5-6 times it looks like. I love this one particular letter. It says, trying to call them only served to increase his dissatisfaction. Yeah, customer service was not the greatest, partly due to the fact that Dolphin had gone bankrupt by that point and he was being passed around from company to company that had just been stuck with the responsibility to provide spare parts and repairs. And there's no record of it in here of this unit ever being completely fixed, which I guess is why it ended up on eBay 20-some years later and I bought it. But anyway, how is it at its desktop replacement experience? Well, let's just go for the full Monty here, starting with the case, which folds out and holds the tablet to make it resemble a laptop configuration. It's pretty neat in theory, but you start running into problems when you want to plug stuff in. The cables just get in the way of the case and just everything. For instance, the floppy drive cable plugs in the bottom and is just too bulky, propping up the tablet in sort of a catty-cornered way. And then, of course, using your own keyboard and mouse is possible, but it makes it look like a medical experiment gone wrong or something. It's on life support. This is sad. But hey, at least I don't need to buy an expensive desktop that works a million times better. Anyway, you turn it on and calibrate the stylus on startup. And the pen works with the BIOS setup utility and whatnot, so that's very handy. And yes, you need the battery-powered stylus because it's not a resistive or capacitive touchscreen. It works more like a Wacom tablet than anything. But yeah, it boots into MS-DOS 6.0, and you actually do need a keyboard here unless you install third-party on-screen keyboard software that works with a mouse, and in that case, the pen will let you do some stuff. But yeah, you really do need a keyboard to use this. And yes, it can run DOS games, but I wasn't able to do that due to a variety of problems with the hardware and the software. For one thing, the BIOS was not reading the floppy drive at all. It just made noise and that was it. And then I couldn't get the serial port to work either. And nothing was seeming to do anything. So I just went straight into Windows 3.1 and it's pretty neat. Although it's not particularly well tailored for pen usage, even with the pre-installed pen extensions on there. As a result, it's pretty much just Windows 3.1 that you're controlling it with a pen instead of a mouse. And yes, the pen acts as a mouse, as you would expect. You can hold down the button on the pen and then tap the screen to click on things and then just move it around, and yeah, it's fine. It's actually pretty accurate for stuff like MS Paintbrush, as you might expect. I quite like drawing on this thing. And then, of course, playing games like Solitaire is quite enjoyable in sort of a silly way. It's not the greatest to look at because of the small black and white screen that it's on, but it's novel, it's different, I like that. It's just really hard to click smaller items on screen, which is most things, because they haven't really scaled Windows to make it work for a smaller screen like this. And the on-screen keyboard application is laughably tiny. It's almost useless. It's ridiculously small. The handwriting recognition, which is a big selling point of this, is also iffy at best. But then again, so is my stylus, to be honest. I don't think it's quite working properly. Sometimes it clicks, sometimes it does it on its own. It's just sort of held together by tape and positive thinking. But even with a perfectly working stylus, I would say stick to the keyboard for typing. Although, this thing is awful. It feels more like a toy than it does a piece of business hardware. Oh well, inside of the DTR1 gets pretty interesting. You might be wondering, how did they cram all of this hardware into here? Well, through using lots of daughter boards and scaled down components. You get a 25 MHz Cyrix 486 SLC CPU, 4 to 6 megs of RAM, 6 in this case, and a 20 or 40 megabyte hard disk drive, this one being the 40 meg. And yeah, look at this little thing. This is actually pretty rare. This is an HP Kitty Hawk micro drive. It fits in the palm of your hand. It weighs about 1 ounce or 28 grams, and it uses an IDE interface, and even includes impact protection by use of a built-in accelerometer. Pretty advanced stuff for the time, but it was also another infamous flop, and maybe that's a story for another day. But anyway, while the form factor impressed and all the specs were kind of interesting on the surface, in actuality and in practice for what people actually wanted, it just didn't work. Nobody was buying these things. In fact, other than a niche group of people using it as a portable Ethernet packet sniffer, I haven't actually heard of many folks finding much of a use for this other than just for collecting purposes. And Dauphin knew it. I mean, there were some problems that they addressed in the DTR2 in 1994, such as giving it a 50 MHz 486 SLC2, PCM-CIA expansion, a larger 90% sized keyboard, 128 megs of hard disk space, and voice recognition instead of having to use the stylus for getting all this stuff written in there, but it just wasn't enough. They declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy in January of 1995 with around $50 million in debt, and 90% of that was owed to a single unnamed supplier. Ugh. Now, they did recover a year later and continued to do business for another decade, but it was no thanks to the DTR 1 or 2. It really is no wonder that this thing flopped. The screen and operating system is suboptimal for serious work. It has a low battery life, a low hard drive capacity, a lofty price, failure-prone components, and to top it off, they had dubious business relationships with their major component suppliers that screwed them in the end. As Dauphin founder Alan Yang said about learning from the experience, "If you are a little mouse, don't dance with an elephant." Well, Dauphin danced with the elephant, and this is what happened, and it's pretty fascinating. I'm kind of glad it did because it's an interesting thing to show you, and I hope that you enjoyed seeing it.
The button is back.
Can't ignore it. Too much swag.
Which is including the Greetings and welcome to an LGR thing, and this lovely device is the Samsung PenMaster 386 SL20, a touchscreen tablet computer from 1992. Back then, this started at a price of $3,995, with costs heading upwards of $5,000 for a fully spec'd example with additional storage. But being that this was Samsung's first tablet computer on the market, and one that packed an impressive 386 MS-DOS PC inside, it's little wonder that it cost half as much as a 1992 Geostorm back then. Shout out to Lorne, by the way, an LGR viewer who sent this example for me to review. These are not common machines whatsoever, especially this particular model from Samsung. Ooh, and he also included some Chicago popcorn. What's this? Caramel and cheese. Now that's some tasty stuff. But anyway, the PenMaster. It's pretty large by today's tablet standards, measuring 11.5 by 9.5 by 1.8 inches and weighing in at 5.5 pounds or 2.5 kilograms with the battery installed. But back when it was one of the brand new pen-based computer systems debuting at the 1991 Fall Comdex show, this was darned impressive. So much so that portable computing pioneer Grid Systems licensed the design from Samsung and sold their own, slightly better-known variant called the GridPad SL. Believe it or not, Grid and Samsung weren't the only companies releasing cutting-edge tablets in the early 90s either. The PenMaster was introduced right alongside offerings from Momenta, Telepad, and Dauphin Technology. If that last one sounds familiar, perhaps you've seen my previous video about the Dauphin DTR1. That was a pretty similar tablet PC in many respects, even running the same base operating environment as the PenMaster, yet it didn't hit the market until a year later, in 1993. On the timescale of early 90s computing, that may as well be an eternity, so let's take a look at what Samsung was doing in these earlier days of touchscreen tablet PCs. As its name implies, the PenMaster comes with a pen suitable for all manner of mastering, outfitted in a blue plastic body matching the word pen in the logo. It has a single button on the side for right-clicking, and the pen position can even be detected a centimeter away from the surface of the tablet screen. So the pen is battery-powered and was pretty advanced for the time, with replacements from Samsung costing $80 each. Naturally, this is intended to work with the resistive touchscreen display here, a backlit 10-inch monochrome LCD panel that displays VGA in up to 32 shades of gray, coincidentally the title of my upcoming romance novel. And along the top of the device, there's an assortment of stubby sliding switches, including the power, brightness, and contrast controls, a tiny reset button, and LED indicators for power and hard disk activity. A majority of the I/O functionality is found on the right-hand side, with a spot for the 17.5-volt DC power brick, a PS2 keyboard port, 9-pin serial port, Samsung floppy drive interface, parallel port, VGA video output, and a 2400 bps datafax modem. Around the left-hand side of the unit is where you get the single PCMCIA slot for expansion cards. On top is where the rechargeable 1.7 amp hour battery is installed, which originally boasted a 2-hour battery life, and along the bottom edge is absolutely nothing, just a nice rounded butt. And underneath is all the expected model number and FCC text, as well as 4 rubber feet, signaling how it's built for plopping down on a flat surface. Yeah, at 5.5 pounds and a couple inches thick, it's just not the type of tablet you want to hold in your hands for very long. However you choose to set it up though, the main thing to do is make sure it's charged up or plugged in so you can get it turned on. At this point, the Pen Master boots up like any PC of the time period, performs the standard hardware checks, and begins loading the operating system. Go Corporation's Pen Point and CIC Pen DOS were both available as options from Samsung, but this one came with Microsoft Windows for Pen Computing version 1.0. Based on Windows 3.1 for desktops, it'll feel darn familiar to anyone used to that, with the main additions being the Microsoft Pen Tools applications. Things like the pen palette for handwriting recognition, the training program for helping it understand your sloppy handwriting, and the on-screen keyboard for when all other inputs inevitably fall flat on their face. There's also the handy notebook application, much more involved than good old Notepad. This is meant to take the place of a personal organizer and rid your life of pesky paper calendars once and for all, in theory. Yeah, all this handwriting recognition stuff with Windows for pen computing never really struck me as something I'd want to use for anything more than a few minutes. Once the novelty of it actually recognizing a few simple words wears off, you're left struggling with the awkwardness of everything else. Even after training the software, errors are commonplace, and the fact that the remainder of the Windows interface is basically unchanged from the desktop PC version doesn't do it any favors in terms of usability. At the same time, though, this was 1992, and the Pen Master was like a glimpse into the future. It was a portable touchscreen computer with an integrated 20 MHz 386 SL CPU and up to 20 megs of RAM, more than enough to take on most anything you'd care to throw at an early 90s tablet. Which nowadays, is mostly going to be solitaire and paintbrush, am I right? Sure, it cost between $4 and $5 grand when it was new, but come on! Screwing around with classic Windows 3 applications using a touchscreen and a stylus is just a giggle-worthy spectacle. Especially since it's on hardware that was absolutely at the forefront for the time period, rarely used by the average home computer user. It's no surprise that a good number of the Pen Master machines from both Samsung and Grid ended up being sold directly to professionals instead of through general retail. After all, its price and functionality fit more in line with the needs of government, medical, business, and education sectors, not the rando at Radio Shack who just wants to play Wolfenstein 3D. Not to say you couldn't play Wolfenstein 3D on here, it's certainly capable of doing so, but there were 1,000 cheaper and more suitable options for that in '92. And as much as I'd love to show something like Wolf 3D running on here, unfortunately I ran into some roadblocks preventing that. For one thing, the 3.5-inch floppy drive it came with no longer reads diskettes at all, making this rather concerning noise anytime you try. And to make
Boost your business's bottom line with the Digital Adoption Program.
Every day, every hour, your body does so much for you. It's time to give something back with Nivea Smooth Body Lotion, enriched with shea butter for...
To make matters worse, the hard drive barely works either at this point, crapping out seemingly at random. This not only froze the system constantly, but the entire drive eventually refused to show up in the BIOS at all. And yes, I've taken everything apart, reseated all the things, and put the machine back together half a dozen times, but that cranky old 63 megabyte Quantum Go drive just wants me to get off its lawn and let it rest in peace. I ended up getting a blank refurbished one that works perfectly, but even after days of trying, I haven't been able to get the old drive working again to make a backup, and I don't have copies of the original software either. Ah well, at least this gives us an excuse to gaze upon its delightful internals, which really looks a lot like a laptop smashed together without the keyboard and with some extra circuitry for the touchscreen. Speaking of which, the Pen Master relies on a chipset by none other than Wacom Company Limited, who made several pioneering pen-controlled computing products and still sells digital drawing devices today. Also making a standout appearance is that lovely Intel 386 SL20 CPU with an accompanying socket ready to make use of a 387 math coprocessor. And up above that, there's the small but densely populated power supply board right next to the internal PC speaker and the Tataran TL5186 coin cell for the CMOS and real-time clock. Yeah, overall I'd say Samsung did a nice job fitting so much into a relatively small package considering the early 90s tech they were working with. The chunky battery, 2.5-inch hard drive, and full-sized I/O ports bulk this thing up quite a bit. There was a long way to go in optimizing portable computing tech, that's for sure. And that's about it for the Samsung Penmaster, a fascinating early entry into the tablet PC marketplace, though one that didn't make much of a lasting impression, it seems. That was undoubtedly due in part to its limited distribution and lofty price point, but also because this was Samsung's first tablet, and one that was simply early to the tablet party in general. Exciting as they were in 1992, tablets really didn't become a thing until the 2010s, and even then, when Samsung released their first Android tablet, the Galaxy Tab, I recall plenty of naysayers and derisive opinions questioning who actually needed a tablet computer. Samsung strikes me as one of those companies that throws every new form factor at the wall to see what sticks, even if the timing isn't exactly optimal. And the Penmaster is an enjoyable example of that from all the way back in 1992. You know, I don't really have any profound point to make here except to say that I'm continually amused by the fast-moving trends in tech and how quickly consumers collectively forget the numerous milestones along the way to where we are now. Forgotten devices like the Penmaster paved the way for the future, at least in some small part, decades in advance. And for that, I think things like this deserve a second look.